There couldn't be a more timely book than this one, 935 Lies, The Future of Truth and the Decline of America's Moral Integrity, by Charles Lewis, one of our premier journalists who has inspired many of us in this craft to aim high and dig deep. First and foremost an investigative reporter, Chuck Lewis produced some of 60 Minutes' hardest-hitting stories. He left CBS News to found the Center for Public Integrity, one of the largest nonprofit investigative reporting publishers in the world. He wrote this New York Times bestseller, The Buying of the President, 2004, and 4 other investigative books. As for this new one, those 935 lies in the title were uncovered in a 3-year study of the rush to war in Iraq by the Center for Public Integrity and the Fund for Independence in Journalism. It is, Lewis writes, a record of what U.S. government officials said to cause most Americans and their elected representatives to completely ignore facts, logic, and reason. Timely, too, for another reason. 50 years ago this August, President Lyndon Johnson, at whose side I was then working, seized on obscure and unverified events on the other side of the world to rush Congress into the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, a motion that he turned into a blank check for escalating the war in Vietnam. As Chuck Lewis rightly says, it was a monumental misrepresentation. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Do you think George W. Bush lied about Iraq? Do you think Lyndon Johnson lied about Vietnam?
Yes, I do. You know, I've tried very hard. You know, in the case of Bush, I actually was trying to give the benefit of the doubt, because if someone believes it, if it's a matter of conviction and they've persuaded themselves of something that's untrue, is that a lie? Or do they just have misguided beliefs that, you know, and I tried to give Bush the benefit of the doubt there, but over time, each passing year, I've decided that I was way too generous. And I look at flatly, did they make statements that weren't true? The answer is yes. Did they decide they were going to willfully do that over a period of 2 years, and was it an orchestrated campaign? And it was, false statements. Those were not coincidental. If you look who said what when, and the when especially is quite relevant. This was an orchestrated campaign, which of course Scott McClellan, the press secretary to Bush, publicly essentially said in his memoir after our report, Iraq War Card, came out, by the way. So I believe in both cases, Lyndon Johnson and George W. Bush, they knew what they were saying was not right. They knew it was not precise or accurate, and they knew it would mislead the American people, but also do what they wanted to do. In both cases, they had an agenda. That's what I believe.
Well, you've said that we should never underestimate the capacity for self-delusion. Who was it who said that convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies? I mean, they can believe it so completely, be so self-deluded, right?
Well, exactly. All the Bush folks, Bush, Cheney, no one has done a candid interview with them where they actually pin their ears to the wall and ask them the tough questions. I have not seen anyone do that. That's not coincidental. They've never been called before Congress. Now, what is that about? We used to have this idea of checks and balances. We don't have any checks and balances. The Bush administration also destroyed tens of millions of emails that no one could see. So, I mean, and no one said anything about it. They had 69 email accounts that were done through the Republican Party while they were conducting business, knowing that's a private corporation, not part of the United States government. So all of this deceit and elaborate efforts to deflect the public from, oh yeah, the truth, it's pretty outrageous. And so we'll never see some of those emails ever, I think, and that to me is tragic. But I've seen enough now to make a conclusion. Yes, we were absolutely misled, and yes, they did lie. And maybe they're lying to themselves. Maybe they actually have come to believe what they're saying. They probably, many of them, some of them at least, probably do. But they'll never say it on television, and I don't even know if they'll tell their spouses. Who will ever say? I don't know.
Your book traces from the Gulf of Tonkin right on through the Vietnam War, and it traces the from the buildup to Iraq to the aftermath of Iraq. And in both cases, you clearly outline a pattern of deception that was continued over a long while.
Well, it's clear. In both cases, those in power knew what they were doing, and those in power had a plan, and those in power orchestrated their plan, and the American people in both instances were completely in the dark. And thousands of lives were lost in both cases. And the fact that we did it, and it's not a partisan thing, there are two different presidents, two different parties, 40 years apart, but guess what, folks? It was the same basic thing. We wanted to do a war of choice.
When the reports came back from the Gulf of Tonkin, Lyndon Johnson believed them. I know that. I was right there by it. The tragedy is he acted before they could be verified and before he could get right. And then he started telling himself that he did the right thing even though the initial information was misleading. And the more he told himself that he was doing the right thing because there was this danger out here, and then he used it to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed, he then felt he had to keep telling it.
Well,
and
yeah, then you're a prisoner to your statements. I understand that dynamic.
What have you learned about how Washington goes to war?
What I learned is that it's orchestrated. They frame it in a way that's palatable to the largest possible audience, and they'll say it many, many, many times. That's the most recent way to do it.
Why is the press so complicit in helping them frame it?
Well, they basically do the stenography of listening to whatever those in power say and reporting it. They see their first duty, wrongly I think, to just report what's said with very little analysis or critical commentary, and they've been doing that actually for a very long time, but they've done it, it's gotten worse over time. The Washington Press Corps is a prisoner of what they're assigned to cover, and that's basically whatever officialdom tells them. But if you say something several times, hundreds of times, there are scientific studies that show we will tend to believe it if we've heard it a lot, even if we actually are not clear at all whether it's true. We just come to assume it's true. Why? Otherwise, we wouldn't be hearing this, right? And so we're basically prisoners of whatever folks tell us who are in power. The problem now is government has more PR people and public relations firms than journalists do. And we actually have 1/3 fewer professional reporters. That's a really rotten combination there. No wonder we're easily bamboozled.
So for the last 2 weeks, you could hardly turn on the television set without seeing the architects and the cheerleaders of the invasion of Iraq 11 years ago being asked their opinion now of what the U.S. should do in Iraq. So there was ABC's Jonathan Karl just the other day turning to Dick Cheney and asking, what would you do in Iraq? There wasn't a bit of irony in his voice or in his eyes.
Wow, that's an abomination. There's a moral problem here. They're not telling the full truth, and they're presenting themselves, the media, a false image. But I know, as a veteran from the networks, actually, I know exactly what that dynamic is, and you are rewarded for the gets you have, the people, the big names that come
interview you get. Yeah,
right, and if you rip them to shreds, guess what? They're not going to come on your show. I've noticed that as Mike Wallace's producer.
You've lived in Washington how long now?
Boy, well, that's really scary, 40 years.
So what did you learn in doing this book over the last 9 years that you didn't know?
Well, it's possible I was in danger of becoming cynical before, but I have to say the extent of the lies. I actually didn't realize the pervasiveness. I just thought that occasionally some turkey would lie. I mean, but it was the extent of this. This is a systemic problem we have here. We have an inability to get the truth in real time, and the media has a complete inability to find out the truth in real time, and when it's right in front of their face, they don't always report it. And so we really have a problem here, because if we don't know what the truth is in this country, we don't have a country. It's end of story. It's not our country anymore. This is fundamental. If the public doesn't care about facts, then journalists, frankly, are not terribly relevant either. I had a professional crisis. Like, why am I doing this if no one cares? And false information is what they believe, not the actual information.
You know James Risen, the New York Times reporter, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's refused to testify before a grand jury under subpoena and reveal a confidential source of information in his book, State of War, about the secret U.S. campaign against the Iranian nuclear program. The Supreme Court has refused to hear his case, and Risen now says he will go to jail if necessary. What are the stakes in this case?
Well, they're very high. I mean, they're very high for Jim in particular. Obviously, he could end up in prison, found in contempt by a judge for not testifying, not answering some questions the government asks. If it gets to that point, there is a chance that the U.S. Justice Department will choose to not proceed at this point. There's been at least some indication that's possible. I don't know that it'll happen. I'm certainly hoping that happens, because there's a dirty little secret about national security reporting. There's only about 15 or so people that do that full time in the United States. In a country of 300+ million people, only 15 or so do it for a full-time job. And Jim Risen happens to be one, and as you know, he's the one who co-authored the domestic surveillance stories that won the Pulitzer back in 2005. Today, the dirty little secret in Washington is that we have thousands of cameras. Every cell phone has a GPS tracking device, and you also can't check into any government agency and sign in to get in to meet with someone, because the government has that information and they'll know who came. And if you call them, their calls are potentially monitored, and there is a general belief, widely shared, that your emails are scraped or at least accessed. And I know journalists who have been told privately by folks in the NSA and elsewhere that that's basically not untrue. And so you have a situation here. They know who his source was.
They do?
They do. And they have multiple ways in which they've identified who it is, and that's why they brought a case, and they have enough evidence that they hope and they think to convict this person. They want
to convict the source.
They want to convict the source, and they want to have Jim Risen be the one who helps them do it. But they don't want to necessarily betray their intelligence ways that they found out that they may be legal because they're government employees, but they're going to appear to be unseemly because they involve monitoring of employees and pulling all kinds of things. So we have another strange thing going on here where the government doesn't really want to go anywhere near this subject, and so so we're all looking at Jim Risen and whether he goes to prison. And the real issue is actually the government. What are they mad about? Well, he did a story in a chapter in his book, State of War, that actually showed that the CIA sent nuclear information to Iran. Oops. And they are livid.
Something we might want to know about.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
I want to know that the government responsible to the people was actually making these serious mistakes.
Yeah, it's unbelievable that they were doing that, and it's unbelievable. And so Risen breaks that story in the book. And they are mad that he did this, and they frankly embarrassed them. And so they're this is retribution. I think it has very little to do with anything but retribution. But I also think what is really disturbing now is the difficulty of doing this type of reporting. It was never easy. Now it is probably more difficult than it's ever been in U.S. history. And President Obama has used the Espionage Act against journalists more than any president in U.S. history.
I think even Nixon only used it once against Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, and Obama's used it how many times?
8 times. It's unbelievable.
The Espionage Act.
Right, the Espionage Act. And who would have ever imagined that? This is something Obama never talked about in campaigns. He never publicly said he was going to go do this. And like a lot of things in his administration, he's trying to have it both ways. He's supporting a shield law to some extent in Congress for journalists, but on the other hand, he's criminalizing investigative reporting by going after sources. And so he's throwing a bone or being accommodating to the national security establishment in Washington which, in just a couple years period did 76 million classified documents, far more than any time in U.S. history. And so he's a prisoner to that community to a large extent. And this is a fellow who didn't know anything about foreign policy, was a state legislator in Illinois, and was a one-term senator. And suddenly he's become more hawkish against reporters than George W. Bush. I don't know anyone who saw that coming.
What does he know we don't know?
That is really a peculiar thing, and it's not been adequately ventilated. And journalists haven't asked Obama directly the few times they have direct access.
So what's at stake if we do silence and punish whistleblowers?
Well, what's at stake is whistleblowers won't come forward. They know they're going to be prosecuted. They know they're being monitored. A lot of sources have dried up. There have been some panels in the last year or two in the journalistic realm, and folks have talked about how it's harder to find people to talk now because they fear retribution. They know that the surveillance has gotten incredibly intense, and the stakes are incredibly high, and they get that. And so a lot of folks who might be inclined to leak, and leakers are wonderful because they tell reporters what they don't already have, and they can't find in any document. They're very essential.
If Edward Snowden had offered you the NSA documents, would you have published them?
I would have liked to. He didn't call.
But if he had?
I would. I would have. When I ran the Center for Public Integrity, we posted the Patriot II Act. We were told by the top aide to the Attorney General, don't do it, you will be sorry if you do. And we quoted them by name in our article. And we posted within minutes.
For my younger viewers, what's the Patriot II Act?
The Patriot, it was called the Patriot II Act, the Domestic Enhancement Security Act of 2003, to be precise. And they were introducing it just days before the invasion of Iraq, perhaps hoping no one would notice. It took the Patriot Act, which substantially limited civil liberties for a large number of Americans, and in general upped the ante about security in America, but it took it to a whole nother place. The Patriot II Act was far more restrictive.
When you released this document against the wishes of the government, were there any personal repercussions to you and your organization?
There weren't any repercussions from that, but I had other things happen. We were sued by Russian billionaire oligarchs for a story we did about Dick Cheney and Halliburton and their business activities in Siberia. That suit went on for 5 years. It was dismissed. Generally, we're not, this is a fortunate country in that sense. We don't generally kill journalists or even beat them up, unlike other countries.
Can democracy die of too many lies?
I don't think there's any question about it. You're usually the one who quotes scripture. But my only thing I could ever quote, I may not even have it perfectly right, but from Proverbs, when there is no vision, the people perish. That happens to be one of the all-time most interesting statements I've ever heard. And I think if you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know what is happening, how are you going to embrace any problem of our time with any seriousness? If all you're ever doing are two parties fighting over everything, and everything is debatable, and you can never reach a consensus on any single thing, and you don't even have common goals anymore, what are we here? Starting to wonder. And so it goes pretty deep here. I think this is so fundamental. I think the only thing we have that we can learn is, I do believe that old saw, information is power. I think if we learn what the truth is, we find out what is actually happening, and we have the facts, we can act on them. But there are still many Americans who won't. I reconcile myself to that, but there are a lot of Americans who need to, frankly, start paying attention.
The book is 935 Lies, The Future of Truth and the Decline of America's Moral Integrity. Chuck Lewis, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
At our website, BillMoyers.com, we'll connect you to that Iraq War card, a searchable database of the 935 lies that led us down the path to bloodshed and chaos. That's all at BillMoyers.com. I'll see you there, and I'll see you here next time.
Don't wait a week to get more Moyers. Visit BillMoyers.com for exclusive blogs, essays, and video features.